Hello and welcome to Business Today Television. I am Siddharth Zarabi and you're watching Easynomics, the show where we get you some of the most important and crucial topics that affect your own economics as well as the country's economy. And on today's subject, we bring to you a point that perhaps has puzzled some of you. Why is India buying Russian oil at a time when pretty much many other countries have decided to sanction Russia and stop all manner of trade relations? And why is this topic relevant and important today? Before we listen into some views, I want to give you the big headline for the moment. I don't know how many of you know this, but Russia has become India's largest supplier of crude oil in the month of October, displacing the world's largest crude oil producer, Saudi Arabia. And I repeat that, Russia is now, at least in the month of October, the largest supplier of crude oil to India. And why has India persisted with purchasing Russian crude oil? Before we discuss that, let's take a listen into what Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar had to say on this just a little while ago.
It is our fundamental obligation to ensure that the Indian consumer has the best possible access on the most advantageous terms to international markets. And in that respect, quite honestly, we have seen that the India-Russia relationship has worked to advantage. So if it works to my advantage, I would like to keep that going.
That was very recently, but this is not the first time that Mr. Jaishankar has spoken on this subject and defended India's right to purchase Russian crude. Let's take a listen into what he had said earlier.
It is a situation today where every country will try naturally to get the best deal possible for its citizens, will try to cushion the impact of this high energy prices, and that is exactly what we are doing. Now, we are not doing it in a defensive way. I mean, we have been very open and very honest about our interest. You know, I have a country which has a per capita income of $2,000. These are not people who can afford higher energy prices.
There have been other ministers of the Indian government who have defended India's stance on this, including a very famous interview by Hardeep Singh Puri, himself a former top diplomat and somebody who understands the energy economy, with a media house, where the core direction of the entire commentary has been India will stand firmly in its own sort of non-aligned corner in a way to decide on what is best for its energy security. And why is energy security important for India? 90% or thereabouts of our petrol, diesel is imported. And without that, our economy would grind to a halt. So what has happened? The numbers first, the big headline number that we have told you, and you can see that on your screen, is that Russia became India's top supplier of crude oil in the month of October. Now, this is very, very important because remember, the largest supplier, Saudi Arabia, with which the government shares a good relationship, and other countries, including primarily the oil producing bloc, which is called OPEC, and other countries, which is called OPEC Plus, that includes non-Gulf countries like Russia, are obviously the most important supplier of crude for India. Since April this year, we have started as a country increasing the amount of crude oil that we import from Russia. The reasons for that, I'll tell you briefly, but let's first take a look at the numbers. 1 million barrels per day, nearly that, just short of that in fact, per day in the month of October. And that accounted for, so far this year, 22% of our entire annual imports of crude oil. Now that 22% is a very, very large volume. And how was it the year before? The year before, only 2.4% of India's total crude oil was imported from Russia. So this is almost 10 times. And who knows, in the remaining part of the financial year, the November to March, 5 months, this could even go up. And that is the sizable shift in which India has decided to purchase Russian oil. Now the reasons are very simple, and there are two reasons for that. One is discount. Just as you chase a discount for the lowest priced product or service that you can acquire, similarly the country, and because most of our oil retailing, oil production is in state hands, there is of course a Reliance, which is a behemoth in refining, along with a couple of others who are refiners, including, by the way, Russia's Rosneft, which is a major investor in India's oil and gas sector. It acquired SR Oil several years ago. The key element here is that Russian oil, since April this year, has been available to us at what is pegged to be an average discount rate of around 7.5%. Now what does that mean? If the international price was $100 a barrel, you could say that it was available to India at $93 per barrel only. 7% may seem to be a small amount, but given the overall size and quantity of our imports, it is a significant amount. And that amount, by one estimate, is well over $16 billion. So you could say that India has managed to save close to 1,60,000 crore rupees and more, depending on the exchange rate that you apply, in terms of its annual import bill for crude oil. Now this has two consequences. And before we discuss that, the second aspect is the reason why it became even more important for India to look for cheaper crude. One, because of the war in Ukraine, there was fluctuation in crude oil prices, and we take 1st April, the beginning of the financial year, as the cutoff period to analyze that. As a result, we saw that crude oil prices started to fluctuate wildly, and that impacts end consumers in a country like India. The second was the continuous weakening of the rupee. As we have seen, the rupee has weakened significantly in the past few months and has been trading at even levels of around 82 rupees to the dollar or thereabouts. Now what does that mean? That when a currency of any country weakens against the US dollar, which is pretty much the benchmark when it comes to global trade, it's how the world practically conducts most of its trade, that has meant that imports have become costlier. So these were the reasons for which India in some ways stood out from the rest of the world and said, listen, India's energy security, the pressures of inflation and the domestic economy are very, very important for India and Russia, and that this is without even the old relationship that India and Russia has. Of course, the war in Ukraine, the aggression that Russia has deployed against the citizens of Ukraine, and the international condemnation against that, including India, which has been measured but has been very clear in its stance as far as the Russian aggression in Ukraine is concerned. But on oil, we have chosen to strike out, and strike out in a manner which is beneficial for India's own energy security and the imperatives thereof. And it was not as if pressure was not sought to be exerted on India. In fact, initially there were questions that were raised on India till Minister Jaishankar, Foreign Minister Jaishankar, made it very clear that why should India stop doing purchasing of Russian crude when the rest of the world hasn't. In fact, due to the dependence of Europe on Russian gas, oil and gas was not part of the banned items. It was not covered under any embargo when the Russian invasion of Ukraine started. The latest element now, as far as the international pressure that was sought to be built up on India with respect to its Russian crude oil imports, was made continuously, but a change happened very recently. And what was that change? US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, who is coming to India and will be here practically within hours. She's on an official visit on the 11th of November, said recently before embarking on this visit, and she was quoted as saying that as far as India is concerned, it will benefit from the proposed price cap on oil, and she added that the United States does not want Russia to unduly profit from the war by enjoying crude oil prices that are essentially very high due to the invasion of Ukraine. Now, this is a statement that's made more in the global context, because remember, it's not just India which is buying Russian crude. So if you felt that, oh, why is India singling itself out and buying Russian crude? The whole world is cutting ties. McDonald's has pulled out of Russia, and billions, close to $600 billion of Russian foreign reserves have been frozen. Why is India choosing to sort of go against the international consensus? Well, it's not just India. China has also been buying discounted Russian crude, and for India, the amount of purchase would have perhaps been even higher, but there was a hitch. When it comes to settlement of such transactions, there's a problem in transacting with Russia in dollars, and we cannot have a situation, despite India and Russia having a rupee-ruble settlement mechanism, of Russians ending up with massive amounts of rupees for which they will find not enough use, because there is a trade imbalance between Russia and India, and therefore that workaround has meant that the amount of imports could have become even higher. So when I began today's episode by telling you that Russia has become India's top crude oil supplier in the month of October, that could have happened earlier, perhaps in September or even August, but could still happen in November or December. But the issues around the settlement, the payment for these transactions have come in the way. So we'll look forward to what the US Treasury Secretary will have to say on this subject as she is in Delhi on an official trip, a packed trip really, where different interactions will happen with the government of India at different levels. Perhaps the issue of this cap on Russian crude oil to prevent Russia being able to earn from the significant exports of crude oil that it makes and continue to finance its war in Ukraine, although there's been a big reversal. Russia has exited the city of Kherson, and that setback has meant to be a big issue as far as entire plan of Russia in Ukraine is concerned. But that's a different subject. I just wanted you to focus on the fact that when it comes to India's energy security, cheap or discounted Russian crude oil has come as a big benefit, because remember, those $16 billion in terms of a discount and more that is likely in the rest of the financial year are in some ways going directly into the pockets of our consumers who would have to otherwise pay a higher price. And remember, oil marketing companies are bearing a big burden. Petrol and diesel prices have not been revised for many months now. Till some time ago, you would recall this summer and before that, crude oil prices were changing, and so were petrol and diesel prices on a daily basis. But for the past 5 months nearly and more, Indian consumers have been insulated from this. So the entire crude oil purchase strategy of India, and the reason why the Modi government has chosen to continue to have trade relations with Russia is very clear through this extremely significant import of crude oil that India has done from Russia. We'll continue to focus on this subject and tell you what happens as far as petrol and diesel is concerned, because petrol and diesel really drives India's economy, and we'll keep a close watch on whether Russia continues to be a top supplier of crude oil to India in the weeks and months ahead. I'll come back with more. For now, it's goodbye. Do stay tuned in, do subscribe, share and like Business Today. We'll be back. Wait for some more programming on the other side.